Labour's pledging to reverse £22 billion worth of cuts to the NHS and halt the proposed closure of dozens of hospitals and A&E units if it wins a general election.
It comes the day after the Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott promised 10,000 extra police officers, but couldn't explain how much that would cost in a radio interview. The Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, joins us now from Leeds. Very good morning to you.
Morning, good morning.
So you say that you would halt the proposed closure of A&Es in England, carry out a full-scale review of all the proposals. Now, the government is hoping to save the NHS £22 billion by 2020, and these are plans which are backed by the King's Fund. So why do you think they've got that wrong?
Well, first of all, these plans are not about the £22 billion worth of savings. That's actually a different set of plans. And actually, the NHS at the moment is finding about £3 billion worth of savings a year as it stands from being more efficient. So if you roll that across the 4 or 5 years of the Parliament, you're getting pretty close to the 22 billion. So that it's a bit of the 22 billion figure, I'm afraid, is a bit of a red herring. It's a different figure. But what's happening at the moment is that we know the NHS is in a state, 4 million people on waiting lists. Last year, 2.5 million people waiting hours in A&E, and perhaps most shamefully of all, 25,000 people waiting more than 2 months for cancer treatment. I mean, that's really quite disgraceful. And across the country, we've got proposals to downgrade A&E departments in places like Darlington and Dewsbury, to close hospitals in some places. And these proposals have met huge local opposition. So we're saying, let's halt them. Let's put a moratorium on them and let's review them all properly. Let's look at them all. Let's test them.
Right, let's do a little review, a mini review of Labour's record on the NHS. You talked about the pressure on A&E services. Of course, partly that is blamed on Labour's GP contracts, which meant that more people have been forced into the A&E system because of the change in out of hours at GP services. 12.7 billion spent by Labour on the National Programme for IT. That was scrapped, waste of money. In 2010, the Private Finance Initiative expanded under Tony Blair's government. The total debt around £300 billion, which would cover the NHS budget for 2.5 years.
Well, I'll tell you what a Labour government delivered on the NHS 7 years in. The biggest hospital building programme in our history, the lowest waiting times. We delivered the highest satisfaction ratings ever for the NHS. I'll always take on the 7 years of a Labour government on the NHS versus 7 years of a Conservative government on the NHS, where we have 4 million on the waiting list, where 25,000 people are waiting 2 months for cancer treatment, where we've seen a NHS crisis this winter where the Red Cross described it as a humanitarian crisis, where people have been waiting on trolleys in corridors, sometimes up to 30 hours. I'll take any day the Labour record on the NHS versus Theresa May's record on the NHS.
In Wales, which is the only part of the UK in which Labour actually runs the NHS, because of the balance of power in the Welsh Assembly, the latest figures show there were significantly longer waits in Wales in 7 out of the 11 main indicators compared to the same indicators in England.
Yeah, but when the Tories were running Wales, I mean, the Welsh Health Service was absolutely dire, and there are other indicators in Wales.
But it's dire at the moment in Wales, and that's where Labour is in charge.
Well, there were other indicators in Wales that show the Welsh Health Service doing better than the English Health Service. But if I may say so, I'm not proposing to run the Welsh Health Service. I'm proposing to run the English Health Service. And in the English Health Service at the moment, we've had a winter crisis with ambulances backed up, not even able to get their patients into the hospitals because they've been so overcrowded.
Even
the local hospital of Jeremy Hunt, the health secretary,
partly as a result of the Labour government's change to GP contracts and the result on out-of-hours emergency services?
No. If you impose the biggest financial squeeze in its history on the NHS, if you refuse to invest in the staffing of the NHS, if you refuse to put the money in, if you expect them to do more and more on less and less, you're going to end up with the crises that we've seen this winter. It's a direct consequence of Theresa May's decisions. Now, she says she's given the NHS the money it asked for. Even the head of the NHS in England, Simon Stevens, he's the civil service head, says it hasn't been given the money it's asked for. So if the NHS boss hasn't got confidence in the costings and the money that the government have given them, why should the public have confidence in it?